My name is Ulysa Hail. I am 65 years old, a retired schoolteacher, a widow who poured her entire life into raising a family that once defined every heartbeat of my existence. For over 3 decades, I guided children's hands across blank pages, helped their lips shape first words, coaxed their hesitant numbers onto chalkboards, believing that patience and kindness were the surest ways to build a life. I believed those same virtues would protect me in my twilight years. That belief was shattered in the merciless glow of a courtroom. The lights above buzzed with sterile brightness, humming like judgment. Every bench was filled neighbors who had once shared casseroles, journalists hungry for scandal, strangers drawn by the thrill of family ruin made public spectacle. And there, at the center, sat my daughter Clara. My daughter. Her hand was clasped tightly by Ethan, her husband, while their lawyer stood sleek, polished, sharp as a blade. At first, Clara would not meet my eyes. But when her lawyer's voice rose, reciting accusations of incompetence, mismanagement, decline, she finally turned. And then she spoke. Her words did not tremble. They cut. "She's a burden," she declared, each syllable falling heavy as stone into a silent lake. A burden. I, who had worked 2 jobs to pay her tuition. I, who had sold my jewelry to cover Ethan's debts when his first business collapsed. I, who had kept vigil through the long, restless nights of Clara's youth, whispering comfort when grief tore her apart. And now all reduced to a single word: burden. Their lawyer pressed on, holding up documents twisted beyond truth. Ethan squeezed her hand like a man savoring victory already won. The gallery murmured, feeding on the tension. I sat alone at my table, silent. To the crowd, my silence looked like surrender. To Clara, perhaps triumph. She demanded not just $50 million, but my dignity, my name, my worth. The judge leaned forward, glasses sliding down his nose, face unreadable. The air thickened, every breath charged with anticipation. Everyone waited for me to collapse, to weep, to beg, to break. But I did not. I had known this moment would come, though I never imagined it would come from my own blood. When my time arrived, I rose, my knees steady, my heels striking marble like a clock counting down to something inevitable. I did not look at Clara. I carried no binder, no army of lawyers, only a single folded page, one fragile sheet that had kept me awake through endless nights. I placed it before the judge, my voice calm. "Your Honor, before any ruling is made, I ask that you read this." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the page. Line after line, his expression shifted curiosity, shock, then cold resolve. He set the paper down, his voice cut through the chamber. "No one moves. Close the doors immediately." Gasps filled the room. The bailiff froze, then rushed to obey. Locks slammed shut, the sound of metal echoing in every chest. Clara's face drained of color. Ethan muttered, jaw tight. Clara tried to rise, but her knees buckled, collapsing her back into the bench. And then they came federal officers in dark uniforms, boots pounding, handcuffs clinking like iron promises. The gallery erupted in panic. Strangers who had moments earlier smirked at my supposed weakness now clutched their coats, whispering frantic prayers. I did not move. I had waited years for this moment, not for vengeance, but for clarity. My daughter, my son-in-law, those who named me burden now trembled in the shadow of truth. As chaos spread, my heart steadied. This was not about money. It was about reclaiming the dignity they had tried to strip away. And yet, if this courtroom was where Clara first called me a burden, perhaps I could have excused it, chalked it up to the heat of litigation, to the poison of rehearsed legal language. But the truth is harsher. Those words had been spoken long before, slipping like cracks into the walls of my home. I remember a Sunday morning, the sun soft through the kitchen window, the kettle's whistle low. My hands, stiff from arthritis, trembled as I reached for a heavy pot. Clara's voice cut the air. "Mom, please let me do it. You're too weak. One day you'll burn the house down." She laughed, but it was not affection. It was dismissal. Ethan sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't laugh, but the curl of his smirk said enough. Days later, when I struggled with groceries, Clara muttered, "Why do you insist on carrying things? Just order delivery, Mom. You can't keep up anymore." I tried to answer gently, reminding her that small chores kept me alive, but before the words left my mouth, she shook her head. "You need to face reality. You can't handle life anymore." Ethan's hand on her arm pretended comfort, but his eyes were already calculating, measuring my decline. One night, folding laundry upstairs, I overheard them. Their voices slipped through the floorboards. "She's sitting on everything," Clara whispered, urgency tight in her throat. "The house, the accounts, all of it. If we could just get her to sign." Ethan cut her off, voice low, firm. "Don't push too hard yet. She looks fragile. One more nudge, and it will all fall into place. The property, the savings, it's practically ours." I froze on the stairs, a shirt limp in my hands, heart pounding like thunder. I had once prayed for Clara to find love, a steady hand when mine could no longer hold hers. Instead, I listened to the man she married coax her into plotting against me. I stared at the photographs on the wall, Clara's graduation, her hand clasping mine, our forced smiles over a Thanksgiving table after my husband's death, images that mocked me now. What had I done to raise a child who saw only leverage where there should have been love? The next morning, Clara greeted me brightly, pouring coffee as though nothing had been said. Her cheerfulness was a mask stretched too tight. Ethan kissed her cheek on his way out, his eyes sliding to me, no warmth, only calculation. I wanted to speak, to say I had heard everything, but my throat locked. Silence, my only refuge, sealed my lips. The morning the envelope came, the sky was gray, drained of warmth. I bent to collect the mail, expecting nothing but bills and flyers, but on top was a thick envelope stamped with the county court seal. My name printed in cold, legal type. My hands gripped the mail until my knuckles whitened. I already knew. Inside, at the kitchen table where I once graded papers and helped Clara spell her first words, I slid it open. The paper was heavy, official, unyielding. Plaintiff, Ulysa Hail. Defendant, Ulysa Hail. Allegations: misappropriation, undue influence, emotional distress. My daughter was suing me. The walls closed in, my daughter's name inked against mine as though we were strangers, every sacrifice erased by that single page. She had not only named me a burden, she had turned the law into her weapon. By evening, the news spread faster than grief. My neighbor knocked, face pale with pity. "I saw the story," she whispered, unable to look at me. I didn't understand until I turned on the television. There was my face, frozen in an old photograph. The anchor's voice smooth, polished, merciless. Manipulation, instability, decline. A daughter's brave step to protect her father's legacy. They showed Clara next, her eyes shimmering with rehearsed sorrow. "This was the hardest decision of my life," she said, Ethan's arm wrapped around her like armor. "I love my mother, but she's not who she used to be. We had to act. To the world, she was a dutiful daughter, sacrificing comfort to protect her family. To me, she was a stranger." Ethan nodded gravely beside her, his eyes cold with calculation. Together, they played their roles, and the cameras devoured every word. By morning, the phone rang endlessly. Old friends left cautious messages. "Just checking in, hope you're okay." Their voices carried judgment masked as kindness. Others said nothing at all. At the grocery store, the cashier's smile faltered. A woman from church turned her cart to avoid me. Even the librarian, who once saved books for me, barely met my eyes. I felt myself shrinking. Every whispered headline carved away another piece of me. The lawsuit wasn't just paper, it was public theater, a script where my daughter had cast me as villain. At night, I reread the complaint, my eyes burning over Clara's words. Unfit, unstable, exploitative, lies pressed into permanence. I wanted to scream to the walls that I was none of these things, that I had lived carefully, faithfully, responsibly, but the walls answered only with silence. Silence, again, my only companion. I noticed the silence of the phone more than its ringing, the absence of friends louder than the presence of enemies. It wasn't just Clara who condemned me. It was the world eager to believe the story of a failing old woman, dangerous even to her own family. And there, in that silence, I understood. This was no longer simply about money. It was about the dignity they thought they had taken, and the truth I still carried. Perhaps it made them feel safer about their own children, their own aging. One evening, I stepped outside to water the small rose bush by my porch. A pair of teenagers walked past, their voices carrying easily. "That's her," one whispered, "the crazy lady who stole from her own family." They laughed, careless in their cruelty. I stood very still, the hose heavy in my broad hand, and I felt shame bloom hotter than the water soaking the earth. Inside, the television continued its endless cycle. Sources close to the family report concerns about Ulysa Hail's mental dead stability. Court documents suggest decades of financial mismanagement. The phrases piled high, and with each one I felt the floor beneath me sink deeper. Clara and Ethan had given the world a story, and the world had chosen to believe it. But beneath the shame, beneath the sting of betrayal, something else took root in me. It was not anger yet, not even defiance. It was a slow, steady awareness that if I remained silent forever, their story would become the only truth left standing. And though my voice felt lost in the storm, I knew I had not been erased. Not yet. The house was too quiet the night I decided to open the old file cabinet. Sleep had abandoned me, leaving only the weight of the lawsuit and the hollow silence that followed me everywhere. I sat at my desk with the lamp casting a pale circle of light. Papers spread before me like fragments of a life I no longer recognized. Bills, retirement, statements, tax returns, all the ordinary proof of years lived carefully. But among them, I found envelopes I didn't remember signing, contracts with my name printed too perfectly, too mechanical. At first, I thought it was the stress of age clouding my memory, that maybe I had indeed forgotten something. But the more I looked, the more the details scraped at me. My signature was there, yes, but it felt wrong. The curve of the Y, the slope of the H. It was mine, but not mine, like someone had studied me closely enough to mimic my hand. I followed the trail from one paper to another until I reached a folder labeled Cresvale Group Holdings. The name meant nothing to me. I had never invested in any group, never trusted anyone but a local advisor to handle what little I had. Yet, here was an entire folder devoted to it. I opened it slowly, and the contents made my skin princess run cold. There were incorporation documents filed with the state, bank records, and loan applications worth sums I never would have dared to request. Every single one bore my name as a guarantor, and on the letterhead, two names stood out: Ethan Hail, listed as founder and chief executive, and Clara Hail, my daughter, listed as deputy director. The room tilted again, but I gripped the desk until my fingers hurt. Forcing myself to steady, I read line after line, each one pulling me deeper into a world I hadn't known they had built around me. Cresvale Group was described as a consultancy firm, specializing in asset management and international expansion. In truth, the numbers betrayed them. The addresses were post office boxes, the phone numbers redirected to nowhere, the transactions routed through shell accounts. It wasn't a business, it was a mask. One particular document stopped me, cold. A loan application for nearly $2 million, supposedly for expanding Cresvale into new markets with my name as the primary collateral. The attached note read, "Approved, based on guarantors, established assets. My house, my savings, my future, all placed as security without my knowledge." I sat back in the chair, my breath shallow. The betrayal I had felt in court now cut sharper because this was no longer just about words. This was evidence of deliberate deception, carefully constructed and signed with my stolen hand. I could almost hear Ethan's voice, calm and persuasive, convincing Clara that this was necessary, that her mother's name was simply a tool waiting to be used. And Clara, my daughter, had not only agreed, but had placed herself beside him as deputy, a partner in the scheme. The clock ticked past midnight, the sound too loud in the small room. I pulled more documents free, scanning quickly now, my eyes racing over dates and figures. The pattern was clear. For months, maybe years, They had been building this company on the foundation of my trust. Ethan had orchestrated it, but Clara's signature was there too, bold and practiced, as if she had taken pride in her role. I tried to remember the last time she had hugged me without hesitation. The last time she had asked me how I was instead of how much money remained in my accounts. Those memories felt distant now, like faded photographs. In their place stood the papers in my hands, undeniable proof that love had been traded for greed. I closed the folder slowly, pressing it against my chest as though I could absorb the truth without it breaking me completely. But the chill in my bones told me otherwise. Nothing in this house was safe anymore, not even my own name. For the first time since the lawsuit, I felt something stronger than grief rising in me. It was suspicion, cold and steady, like the first spark of fire hidden beneath ash. They had used me as collateral, reduced me to a signature, and thought I would never look closely enough to see it, but I had seen it now. Cresvale Group was not a company. It was the mask my daughter and her husband wore while they dismantled my life piece by piece. I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness, the folder still in my dulled hands. The night pressed heavy around me, but inside a new clarity sharpened. Whatever they had built, I would tear apart, and I would do it quietly, carefully, with the patience of a woman who had spent her life teaching children that every lie, no matter how polished, eventually shows the smudge of ink beneath. There are nights when the past returns without invitation, slipping through the cracks of silence and settling heavily on my chest. One memory more than any other lingers with painful clarity, as though it happened yesterday. It was a cold afternoon in late autumn, the kind where the wind carries the smell of burning leaves, and every gust feels like it can strip you bare. Clara was 17, standing on the edge of her future, bright-eyed and eager for the life I wanted so desperately to give her. She had been accepted into a college she dreamed of, but the tuition bill lay heavy on our kitchen table, larger than anything I could manage with. My modest teacher salary. I remember holding the bill in my hands, the numbers blurring as I tried to make them add up. I had stretched every dollar, taken extra shifts, tutoring, and even sold furniture I no longer needed. Still, it wasn't enough. That was the day I walked into a small pawn shop downtown with my wedding ring wrapped in tissue paper. The gold had dulled with time, the diamond tiny but precious, a symbol of the life I once built with my husband before he was gone. My fingers trembled as I laid it on the counter. The man behind the glass didn't look at me twice. He weighed it, appraised it, and slid the cash across, as if it were nothing more than metal and stone. I remember stepping out into the cold air, clutching the bills in my pocket, and feeling both hollow and relieved. I told myself it was worth it, that love was not measured in rings or glittering stones, but in what we sacrificed for the people we cherished. When I handed bead or wood Clara the tuition payment later that evening, she stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Where did this come from?" she asked, her voice almost fearful. I tried to brush it off. "I found a way. That's all you need to know." She pressed me, and finally I told her. I told her about the pawn shop, about the ring. Her face broke into sorrow, and she wrapped her arms around me so tightly I could feel her heart racing. "Mom," she whispered into my shoulder, I promise you one day I'll take care of you the way you've always taken care of me. I'll never let you feel alone when you're older. You'll never have to worry. That's my promise." Her words poured into me like sunlight, warming the hollow place left by the loss of that ring. I held her as if my arms could freeze the moment in time, as if love spoken aloud could shield us from the uncertainty ahead. For years, I carried that memory like a treasured keepsake, believing it was proof that no matter what storms came, the bond between mother and daughter was unbreakable. Now, when I sit in silence and hear the echo of Clara's voice in the courtroom calling me a burden, the memory cuts deeper than any accusation. How could, in the same girl who once swore she would protect me, now look at me as nothing more than an obstacle? The image of her teenage face, tearful and full of gratitude, collides with the cold expression she wears today, rehearsed and detached. I cannot reconcile the two, yet they both exist inside her. The daughter who promised care and the woman who plots to take everything from me. I think often of that ring. Sometimes late at night, I can almost feel the weight of it still pressing against my finger. The smooth band worn by years of life and work and love. It was never expensive, never extravagant, but it was a piece of me. To give it up felt like carving away a part of myself for Clara's future, and she knew it. She knew exactly what it meant when she promised she would be there for me. Memory can be cruel. It does not fade kindly when the present contradicts it. Instead, it sharpens the edges, forcing you to see the contrast more starkly. I wish I could forget her promise that night in our worn little kitchen when she swore I would never be alone. But forgetting would be easier than remembering, and I do not have the luxury of erasing what is carved into my heart. I sit now surrounded by documents that prove her betrayal, by headlines that paint me as unstable, and yet it is not the papers or the reporters or even the lawyers that break me most. It is the echo of her young voice promising a love that no longer exists. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers making that vow, or if she has buried it beneath ambition and Ethan's whispered plans. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets it even for a fleeting second. But then I see the way. She looks at me now, eyes cold with calculation, lips curling into disdain. When she calls me weak, that promise, once so full of light, lies shattered, and I am left to pick up the shards alone. The memory remains, not as comfort, but as proof of what I lost, long before the courtroom ever opened its doors. After I found the Cresvale folder, I did what any careful teacher I would do. I checked the ledger of my own life. I ordered my full credit reports, printed them page by page, and laid them across the dining table like a map. The first wrong turn appeared quickly, and an online savings account I had never opened, created 9 months earlier with my social security number and my home address. A second account surfaced at a different bank, opened the same week. Then a credit card with an unfamiliar rewards program, followed by a money market account that listed retirement planning as its purpose. Each one carried my name, my birth date, my identity, as if I had split into versions of myself that wandered off to live lives I never approved. I went to my bank the next morning with a notebook and a calm voice I had practiced in the mirror. The branch manager, Miss Patel, greeted me with polite concern. I asked to review any accounts that had been opened or modified in the past year. She hesitated, citing policy, until I slid my driver's license and a stack of statements across the desk. "Something is wrong," I said quietly. "Please help me see it." Policy bent under the weight of sincerity. She pulled up my profile and frowned. "I'm seeing a new online banking profile linked to your customer ID," she said. "It was created from a different email than the one you've always used. There's also a note that an authorized person was added to assist with transactions." I felt the blood move slowly through my body like syrup. "Who is the authorized person?" She scrolled, then looked at me with a kind of gentle dread. "Ethan Hail." My son-in-law's name hung in the air between us. Miss Patel turned the monitor toward me so I could see. The screen showed a scanned, durable power of attorney limited granting transaction, access for the benefit of the principal Ulysa Hail. My signature curved along the bottom, but not the way mine curves. The loop on the Y too tight, the cross on the H too neat. The notary stamp read Dawn Kepler. Commission expires 812 years before the document's date. I asked for copies. Miss Patel printed them carefully and slipped them into a folder. Before she did, she clicked into the transaction history. There were transfers I did not recognize, small test deposits, then larger movements to an account ending in 2719. The memo lines read like coded scraps. Cresvale Ops Expansion Wire Consulting. Fee. One line made my stomach harden. A DISP Valorade Veterans Fund. I waited until I reached the parking lot to breathe. I sat in my car, the folder on my lap, and called the number listed for the descriptor. A recorded voice answered. Then a woman from compliance returned my call an hour later. She sounded efficient, almost kind. "Yes, Miss Hale, I see 2 disbursements approved under your name for caregiver support," she said. "We have your applications, ID, and signed attestations. Funds were issued to the 10 Downin account on file." "I never applied," I said. "Please send me what you have." She emailed within minutes. I opened the packet at my kitchen table. There were 2 applications for the Valorade Veterans Fund, both approved. One described me as a caregiver to a veteran family, another as a senior facing financial instability. Both contained my scanned driver's license and an electronic signature. Contact information listed an email I had never used, and a phone number I recognized only because it had called my house 1,000 times, Ethan's. The disbursement account number matched the 279 ending on my bank's printout. I followed the trail to a small regional bank known for business clients. Their logo appeared on a monthly statement, addressed to a mailbox suite downtown. The name on the receiving account was not mine. It was Cresvale Group Holdings. I stared at the pages until the letters blurred. They had used my name to draw money from a fund intended to steady families who had already given so much. I thought of the veterans I had taught in night classes after their service. The men and women who flinched at loud doors and still showed up to learn. I imagined a family somewhere denied, because my identity had been used to take what belonged to them. I called the regional bank and asked to verify the beneficiary information for the Cresvale account. The customer service rep could not discuss details, but she confirmed what I already knew without naming it. "The authorized signers are on file," she said. "One is the chief executive. There's also a deputy." Her tone softened. "Is there a concern about fraud, ma'am?" I thanked her and ended the call. I did not trust my voice to hold steady for one word more. I turned back to the durable power of Attorney Limited. The notary stamp called to me. I searched the state registry for Don Kepler. The commission number existed, but the expiration date printed on my document did not. The real stamp would have expired a year earlier. Whoever had prepared the paper either misread the record or didn't care to check it. Fraud rarely trips over truth. It trips over laziness. I needed corroboration. I drove to the mailbox suite listed on the bank statement. The lobby smelled of printer ink and stale coffee. A clerk looked up with a weary smile. I asked whether Cresvale Group held a box there. He glanced at the wall of brass squares and confirmed it. "Newish account," he said. "They come by late." My hands tightened around my purse strap. "Do you ever see who picks up the mail?" He hesitated, then shrugged. Then a tall guy, mid-30s, always in a navy jacket, polite sign-in reads, "E. Hale." Back at home, I laid the folder beside the credit reports. A picture formed with painful clarity. Accounts opened in my name. A falsified authorization placing Ethan at the center. Disbursements from a veterans fund routed into Cresvale's account. Clara's title, Deputy Director, appearing wherever the company asserted legitimacy. Every path led back to the man who had stood next to my daughter on the courthouse steps, his arm around her shoulders in practiced concern. I made myself a list as the room dimmed into evening. Call the credit bureaus, place fraud alerts, freeze new accounts, request all K1S tied to Cresvale, meet with someone who could help me interpret what I was seeing. Each checkmark steadied my breathing. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if each action could hold me upright. Before bed, I looked again at the applications bearing my name. At the bottom of one, above the forged signature, a line read, "I affirm, under penalty of perjury, that all information herein is true and complete." I traced the fake curve of my name with my finger, then closed the folder. The house was very still. In that stillness, I felt a kind of resolve I had not felt since my husband died. They had borrowed my name to take money from those who had already paid enough. I could bear the harm done to me. I would not bear the harm done in my name. There was a time when my phone would ring with invitations to lunches, church gatherings, or book club meetings. People once called me for advice, for a recipe, or simply to hear my voice. But as the weeks of the lawsuit stretched on, the calls thinned out until the silence between them was louder than the conversations themselves. The silence became its own companion, settling into the corners of my house like dust no one bothered to sweep away. I first noticed it at the grocery store. Marjorie, who had sat beside me at Bible study for 20 years, saw me in the produce aisle and turned her cart abruptly, pretending to compare apples she had no intention of buying. I wanted to believe she hadn't seen me, that it was a coincidence. But when I called her name softly, she stiffened and pushed on without turning her head. The following Sunday, I walked into church and felt the air change. Heads dipped, smiles faltered. A pew where I once sat, surrounded by friends, remained empty until I slid into it alone. The sermon echoed off the walls. But the warmth I had always felt was absent. During fellowship afterward, no one reached for my hand. Conversations flowed around me like water around a stone, deliberate and unyielding. It was not long before I discovered why. Clara had been speaking, at first in whispers, then in statements dressed as concern. "I'm worried about Mom," she told Marjorie, who repeated it to Helen, who shared it with others. "She's been so forgetful lately. I think she's losing track of reality. That's why we had to step in." The words multiplied until they became a net that caught me wherever I went. At the post office, a clerk leaned toward me with exaggerated patience, repeating simple directions as if I were a child. At the library, the volunteer offered to help me use the self-checkout, though I had done it myself for years. On the sidewalk, I overheard two women whispering. "It's sad, really," Clara says. "Her mother sometimes doesn't even remember what day." "It island," the other clucked her tongue. "She's lucky her daughter is stepping up." Each time I heard these stories, my heart clenched in a different way. It was not just the betrayal of lies, it was the ease with which people believed them. Perhaps it comforted them to imagine age as inevitable decline to accept Clara's performance as filial duty. It made them feel their own families would protect them when the time came. And so, with a few careful words, Clara isolated me more effectively than any locked door ever could. I tried to fight back quietly. I kept meticulous notes, writing down dates, conversations, even the weather, as proof that my mind was still clear. But notes in a journal do not change the way people look at you when they've already decided you're slipping. They smiled with pity, with the soft edges of superiority, as though humoring a woman who could no longer be trusted with her own story. One afternoon, I called an old friend, Lillian, who had been my confidant through widowhood. We had once shared tears over coffee, laughter over memories, hope over long walks. When she answered, her tone was guarded. "Ulysa, I can't get in the middle of this. Clara told me you've been confused lately, forgetting things. I hope you get the help you need." I tried to protest to remind her of our years of trust, but she was already excusing herself, her voice polite but firm. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand, its silence as final as a slammed door. Nights became the hardest. I sat by the window and watched the glow of other homes where laughter still spilled through curtains. My house was filled, only with the ticking of clocks and the occasional creak of wood settling. I remembered Clara's promise as a girl, her arms tied around me when I pawned my ring, her vow that she would never let me be alone. Now she had not only abandoned that vow, she had turned it inside out, convincing the world that I was already lost to forgetfulness. The cruelest moment came when I overheard a conversation at the pharmacy. Clara had apparently spoken to the staff directly. "Please watch out for my mother, she had told them. "She sometimes forgets her prescriptions and I'm scared she'll mix things up." The pharmacist greeted me that day with an overbright smile and an offer to pre-sort my pills into labeled packs. I thanked him politely, but inside I burned. Clara had planted doubts so deep that even strangers managed my bed. life as though I were incapable. I learned to move carefully, to keep my head high, though the air around me thickened with judgment. I carried myself with the dignity I still possessed, even when others refused to see it. Yet inside, the ache grew sharper. To lose the trust of a community is one kind of sorrow. To have your own child dismantle that trust is another altogether. Still beneath the loneliness, a seed of strength pushed quietly. If Clara wanted me cut off from the world, she would discover the danger of a woman forced into solitude. Silence sharpens memory, and memory, my true memory, was intact. I would keep every detail, every slight, every document until the day came when truth would have taken its turn. The phone rang just after midnight, slicing through the stillness. Talk of my house. I jolted awake, my heart hammering as though I'd been running in a dream. The screen showed no name, just unknown caller. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me knew it would not. Wait. I pressed the phone to my ear and whispered, "Hello." The voice that answered was low and deliberate, every syllable sharpened by menace. "Stop digging. Stop looking. If you value your safety, walk away." I sat up straighter in bed, the sheets bunching around me. "Who is this?" My voice sounded braver than I felt. "You don't need to know," the caller replied. "But if you care about living quietly, you'll leave Cresvale alone. Close the files. Stay out of it." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. The dial, tone echoing in my head like a scream. My hands shook as I set it on the nightstand. The silence of the house now felt hostile. Every shadow stretched too long, every creak of the old wood sounding like footsteps. The next morning, I told myself it had been a prank, a cruel joke, but when I opened my blinds, I saw the car. A black sedan I didn't recognize sat idling across the Danhar street. Its windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. At first, I told myself it belonged to a neighbor's guest. But when I returned from the market later that afternoon, it was still there. The engine purred softly, never off, never loud, just waiting. I began to notice it more often. Parked 2 houses down when I visited the post office, waiting near the pharmacy when I picked up my prescriptions, a shadow trailing me without ever stepping forward. Whoever sat inside wanted me to know I was being watched. I thought of Clara and Ethan, their careful faces outside the courthouse, their smiles rehearsed for cameras. They weren't just greedy. They were connected to something larger, something colder. The Cresvale Files had hinted at it already. Shell accounts overseas, wire transfers labeled with abbreviations I didn't understand, payments routed through places I'd only read about in the news. Now the pieces shifted into a darker shape. This wasn't just family betrayal. This was business for people who thrived in shadows. One night, I gathered the courage to walk out to the porch and stare directly at the sedan. The driver's window cracked, opened just enough for me to see the orange tip of a cigarette flare, then vanish. My chest tightened. Whoever it was had no need to hide. They wanted me to feel the weight of their presence to press fear into me until I broke. That evening, I sorted through the Cresvale documents again, searching for what might have drawn such attention. I found wire transfers to firms with names that sounded legitimate, Aquila Capital Partners, New Horizons Investments, but the addresses led to international financial centers notorious for secrecy. I may have been a retired teacher, but I know not. I could recognize patterns of laundering when I saw them. Ethan hadn't just forged my name to steal. He had tied it to a web that reached far beyond our small city. As I highlighted transaction after transaction, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I froze, then answered. This time the voice was female, clipped and urgent. "Mrs. Hale, you don't know what you're walking into. They don't forgive curiosity. End this before it consumes you." Her words carried a note of fear, not just warning. Then she hung up. I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the folder. The paper edges pressed grooves. into my fingers. Every instinct told me to retreat, to stay silent, as I always had. But the thought of Clara's name scrolled beside Ethan's on those documents burned hotter than fear. My daughter had stepped into something that would swallow her whole, and she was dragging me with her. If I remained silent, they would succeed, and I would be erased in more ways than one. That night, when I peeked through the curtains again, the sedan was gone, but the street felt no safer. I knew they would be back. The game had shifted. It was no longer just a lawsuit or a family betrayal. I was staring into the cold eye of something that crossed borders, something that lived in the shadows of money and power. And yet, for the first time, I felt my fear steady into resolve. If Clara and Ethan had tied my name to these networks, then my silence would not protect me. Only truth would, and I would find it, no matter who tried to stop me. There is an afternoon I cannot shake, an afternoon that returns like a song that knows every seam in the heart. Clara was 12, cold-legged, all elbows and promise, wearing a backpack too heavy for her narrow shoulders. She burst through our front door with the slap of wet sneakers on tile, cheeks blotched, breath shredded into uneven pieces. "Sweetheart," I said, but the word barely crossed the room before she collapsed into me. The impact sent me back a step. Her hair smelled of rain and pencil shavings. She tucked her face under my chin and sobbed with the desperate rhythm of a child who fears. The floor has fallen away. I held her as if two arms around a shaking body could argue with the world. They laughed. She choked. They said I talk like a teacher, like I think I'm better. They took my notebook and passed it around. Someone said my dad being dead makes me weird. I felt the old ache open where her father should have been. Kids are cruel when they don't know what to do with pain, I told her. Cruelty is a language learned from fear. I guided her to the kitchen table, the place where injuries come to be named. I warmed milk on the stove, stirred in honey, and set the mug between her small hands. "Am I weird?" she asked, eyes too old for 12. "You are extraordinary," I said. "Extraordinary. Feels lonely until it becomes strength." She reached into the wreck of her backpack and pulled out the notebook. The cover was bent, a corner torn. I smoothed it on the table and taped the tear with the same care I use on old photographs. "There," I said softly, whole again. She took a long sip, then looked at me with a plea I still feel in my ribs. "Don't ever leave me," I brushed damp hair from her forehead and let certainty live in my voice. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She pressed her palm to my cheek. "Promise," she whispered. "Promise you won't leave." "I promise," I answered, meaning it with everything I knew about love. We made grilled cheese and tomato soup because comfort often needs to be simple. We ate on the couch with a blanket across our knees. When sleep finally found her, her head rested in my lap, her mouth slack. In the safety children know once the storm is past. I watched her breathing steady and thought, a life is built from small assurances repeated until they harden into foundation. That memory now lives beside another, the courtroom's harsh light, my daughter's voice steady and cold. "Burden," she called me, as if the word were a verdict and not the wounded island. When I set the two scenes side by side, the honeyed steam over a chipped mug, and the way she would not meet my eyes while a lawyer carved a story out of me, the ache becomes almost physical. How does the girl who begged me never to leave become the woman who walks away first? I try to be fair when I remember. I think of the messages the world pressed into her, the hunger to belong, the gospel of more, the lie that love equals usefulness. I catalog my own failings, the winter the pipes burst, the recital I missed, the nights I fell asleep in the chair. But inventory does not explain the coolness in her eyes or the ease with which she repeated a stranger's description of me to cameras, eager for a simple story. Sometimes I open a drawer and find one of her old notebooks, a heart sketched in the corner, my name looped in bubble. Letters. I press my fingers to the page and wait for something besides loss to rise. I tell myself the child still lives inside the woman, that the part of Her that ran home when the hallway turned cruel is not extinct, only buried. Hope is a discipline. I practice and tame it like an old piano piece. At night I remake our ritual in my mind. I pour warm milk into an imagined mug, stir in honey. I picture her older face in the chair where she once swung her feet, and I say, "Bring it here. The hurt and the noise and the bad advice. Lay it down." In the vision, her shoulders lift and sink, and the sentence returns in a new shape. Not "don't leave me," but something nearer to truth. I forgot how to come back. I do not know if she will. I only know the promise I made was real, even if it could not save us from this distance. She asked me never to leave. I did not. She left, and the leaving echoes through rooms that still remember her. Laughter. I do not polish that afternoon into perfection. We were ordinary people, in an ordinary kitchen trying to make something kind out of a hard day. Yet the kindness was real, and it is the measure I hold against the coldness that came later. I keep it like a light I can carry always. I knew I could not fight. Was this alone? My name had been dragged through the mud. My daughter had the community convinced I was losing my bravery. My mind, and Ethan's hands were buried so deep in forged signatures and shadow companies that I could no longer untangle them without help. One night, I spread the folders across my dining table, bank statements, forged powers of attorney, the Cresvale records, and I realized the fight had already outgrown me. If I wanted to reclaim my dignity and stop them from hollowing out everything I had built, I needed allies. Naomi was the first person I thought of. She had been one of my colleagues at the high school, teaching history while I taught literature. Years later, after a career change, she became an attorney. Though she retired a few years back, she still had a sharp mind and sharper instincts. When I called, she answered on the second ring. I hesitated, afraid she had heard the rumors, but her voice was warm. "Ulysa, it's been too long." I told her everything about Clara, about the lawsuit, about Cresvale, and the threats. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Bring me the papers tomorrow morning. We'll start there." The next day, I walked into her study, stacks of case law still lining her shelves, dust motes catching the light. She adjusted her glasses and leafed through my folder with practiced hands. "The signature is forged," she said without hesitation. "I can tell. And the notary stamp? Sloppy work. If they're bold enough to present this in court, we have leverage." She closed the folder and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You're not crazy, Ulysa. You're in the middle of fraud, and you won't face it alone." Through Naomi, I reached Samuel. He had served as a detective in the city police for decades before retiring to a quieter life. His hair had gone silver, but his eyes carried the steady weight of a man who had seen too much to be surprised anymore. Naomi trusted him, and that was enough for me. When I met him at the diner on Main Street, I laid out the Valorade veterans, fund records, the bank transfers, the Cresvale accounts. His expression tightened as he flipped through them. "Valorade," he muttered. "I worked a case 5 years back. Similar scam. People using veterans' names to siphon funds meant for rehab and housing. We never caught the ringleader." Seeing this, I'd bet money. Ethan and Clara are tied to the same network. He looked at me then, steady and deliberate. "This isn't just about you. They've been bleeding veterans' families dry, using your name as cover. If that's the case, we'll find proof, and it'll blow the doors off everything." His words should have terrified me, but instead, they steeled me. For the first time, I could feel the tide shift. The last piece came with David, a financial analyst Naomi had once mentored when he was a student. He had gone on to work with banks and nonprofits known for untangling the most complicated money trails. When Naomi called him, he agreed to meet me in her study. I spread out the records again, tracing lines with my finger while he scribbled calculations on a yellow pad. He worked silently for nearly an hour before leaning back. "They set up a lattice of shell accounts," he explained. "Money moves in circles to look legitimate, but it always funnels back to Cresvale. And here, he tapped a column of numbers. Payments disguised as consulting fees. That's where they're pocketing it. Ulysa, you're not just a guarantor. You're the keystone. Without your name, none of this stands. They needed you to make it credible. The words landed hard, but with a strange kind of strength. If I was the keystone, then I had more power than I realized. I wasn't just a victim. They couldn't operate without me. That truth, bitter as it was, meant I had leverage. Naomi closed the folder and looked at the three of us around the table. We have enough to start building a case, she said. But more importantly, you have allies now. Samuel will dig into the veterans angle. David will map the finances. I'll prepare the legal framework. And you, Ulysa, you'll stay. Are steady. You'll keep every record safe, every note clear. Together, we'll corner them. For the first time since the lawsuit arrived, I felt something close to hope. Not naive hope. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first blow, but a firmer ground beneath my feet. I looked at their faces, Naomi's calm, resolve, Samuel's nonsense grit, David's analytical focus, and realized I was no longer carrying this alone. Clara and Ethan had tried to isolate me, to convince the world I was weak, unstable, finished. Instead, their cruelty had pushed me to gather people who understood truth, who would not be swayed by rumors or headlines. That, at night, as I locked the folder away in a fireproof box, I thought of the Black Sedan, the anonymous calls, the whispers in my community. They still surrounded me, but they no longer owned me. I had allies now, and with them I would fight not only for myself, but for the dignity of every name Ethan and Clara had stained along the way. The breakthrough came one damp afternoon in Naomi's study, where papers had spilled across her dining table until it looked like the aftermath of a storm. Samuel sat, hunched over a stack of printouts, his pencil tapping against the wood in a rhythm that betrayed his restlessness. David had his laptop open, scrolling through financial records with the intensity of a surgeon searching for a brain tumor. I sat between them, my hands folded to keep them from shaking. For weeks, we had been piecing together fragments, scraps of information that hinted at something vast, but never quite congealed into proof. That day, it finally did. David's eyes froze on the screen. "Wait, this isn't just sloppy accounting," he said. He angled the laptop toward us. "There's a second set of records buried inside these files. They're disguised as routine consulting expenses, but if you follow the timestamps, look here, you'll see a parallel column. It's a ledger." He printed it out page after page until the Babel friend. The sheets formed a stack nearly 2 inches thick. Naomi leaned forward, her glasses sliding down her nose as she scanned the first few lines. Samuel stopped tapping his pencil. The ledger was meticulous. Each transaction logged in coded shorthand. Transfers from Valorade labeled as VASB. Payouts to foreign accounts masked under meaningless initials. Monthly kickbacks listed beside Clara's name. Ethan's initials scrolled in margin notes. My name appeared too, but always as the shield. Oh, I stared at it until my eyes blurred, seeing the cruel irony. My signature had brossid, all the slan been stolen, and now here was the record of every theft laid out in careful handwriting. "This is it," Naomi whispered. "This isn't circumstantial. This is intent, fraud, laundering, theft, documented in their own hand. With this, a judge doesn't just see suspicion. He sees a case." The ledger felt heavy when David placed it in my lap, the weight of paper somehow heavier than steel. It was strange how something so small could hold lives inside it. Mine, the veterans, whose funds had been siphoned, the families left without aid. The handwriting looked almost casual, as though Ethan had never feared discovery, as though Clara had grown so accustomed to betrayal that she saw nothing wrong in signing her initials beside his. But possession of the ledger changed everything. For the first time, we had a weapon instead of only wounds. Naomi's face sharpened with determination. "Well, make certified copies. Keep the original sealed. This is the paper that will end them." Still, Even as we planned, I felt the prickle of unease at the base of my neck. It had begun earlier that week, with the same black sedan idling a few houses away. Now there were other signs. A man at the grocery store who lingered too long in the cereal aisle, eyes darting whenever I turned. A jogger who passed my street at the exact same time, 2 mornings in a row, never sweating, always glancing at my house. One evening, when I stepped outside to take in the air, I saw Clara herself across the street, half hidden behind the sedan. She was watching me. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no guilt in hers, no hesitation, only calculation. She turned sharply and slid into the car, which pulled away without a sound. She knows, I told Naomi later. She knows we found something. Naomi frowned. That means she'll panic. And when they panic, they make mistakes. Samuel was less calm. It also means they'll double down. If she's putting people on you, then this ledger is dangerous enough to threaten everything they've built. Be careful, Ulysa. Careful felt inadequate. Every creak of my house at night sounded like a footstep. Every knock at the door sent my pulse into a gallop. I began keeping the ledger with me at all times, tucked in a worn leather bag that never left my side. I carried it to the bank to place in a safety deposit box, then carried it back out again, unwilling to let it leave my sight. The weight of it was a constant reminder that I was both hunted and armed. One night, I spread the pages across my own table, tracing the ink. With my finger, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the bottom of the final sheet, scrolled hastily, were the words Q4 allocation, doc. The letters matched Ethan's hand, I realized, with a jolt that this ledger was not just evidence. It was the very paper I had carried into the courtroom, the one that had made the judge rise to his feet and order the doors closed. It was all here. Every crime laid bare in their own record-keeping, and I had been the one to place it into the hands of justice. The knowledge steadied me even as the fear pressed closer. Clara might send cars, might spread lies, might try to corner me into silence, but the ledger was truth in ink, and truth has its own kind of gravity. It pulls everything else down with it. That night, as I locked the pages back into my bag, I looked out the window. The sedan was back, engine idling. I whispered into the quiet, not to them, but to myself. You can follow at me. You can call me a burden. You can smear my name, but you cannot erase this, and you cannot erase me. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than any storm I had ever known. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my face composed into the calm of a woman who had weathered far too many battles in silence. Across from me, Clara sat with her lawyer, her posture perfect, her hair brushed to a glossy shine. Ethan was just behind her, whispering from time to time, his eyes fixed on me with the steady malice of a man who thought he had already won. The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the bailiff called the room to order. Wood creaked as everyone rose and then sat again. I could hear the shuffle of reporters' pens against their pads, the faint whir of cameras, to adjusting their focus. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a theater in which my daughter had scripted herself as the dutiful victim and me as the frail villain. Her lawyer rose first, a man whose suit fit him as tightly as his smirk. Your Honor, he began, we are here today not only to address the grave mismanagement of family funds, but to confront a tragic truth. Mrs. Ulysa Hail, though once a respected teacher, has declined in recent years to a state that can only be described as instability. She is no longer capable of understanding the consequences of her actions, and her daughter, Clara Hail, has bravely stepped in to protect what remains of their family's legacy. I did not move. I did not blink. His words hung in the air, poisonous and deliberate, yet I let them pass over me. Silence can feel heavier than any outburst, and I clung to it as if it were armor. Then Clara herself stood. She looked toward the bench, with eyes that glistened artfully. Your Honor, she said, her voice trembling as though weighted with sorrow. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. I love my mother. I grew up with her as my hero, but she's not the same anymore. She forgets things. She confuses people. She once left the stove on all night and didn't remember doing it. I've had to answer calls from neighbors worried she was wandering at odd hours. I've tried to help, but she refuses every offer. It breaks my heart to say this, but she is no longer safe with the responsibility she holds. That's why I'm here. The courtroom murmured, sympathy rippling through the gallery. I heard it in the shifting of bodies, the soft sighs, the cluck of tongues. They believed her because her tears looked real and her voice shook at all the right moments. Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it as if to remind the audience that this was love, not greed, that this was duty, not theft. I remained still. Inside, my chest tightened with every word, each lie cutting deeper than the last. Memories rose unbidden. Clara as a girl, clutching me after a cruel day at school. Clara swearing she would never leave me when I was old. Now she painted me as a woman unfit even to be trusted with my own name. The lawyer continued, displaying carefully curated photographs of me in moments of fatigue, caught unawares. A neighbor's affidavit claimed, I had once repeated myself in conversation. A pharmacist's note suggested I had been confused about my prescriptions. Each piece was laid out with precision, designed to form a portrait of decline. I listened to the narrative of my supposed madness, the careful architecture of deception, and I knew that any protest would sound like desperation, so I said nothing. The judge studied me over his glasses, his expression unreadable. I wondered what he saw, a mother betrayed or an old woman, crumbling beneath the weight of time. The gallery watched with breathless fascination, their judgment sharp as knives. The silence I maintained became its own kind of statement. Let them wonder if I was too broken to speak, or too certain to waste words. Clara wiped her eyes with a tissue her lawyer handed. I don't want to take anything from my mother, she said, her voice cracking. I just want to protect her. I want her to live safely with dignity, without the burden of decisions she can no longer manage. Her performance was flawless. The courtroom leaned into her sorrow, into her rehearsed tremor, into the image of a daughter sacrificing comfort to save her mother from herself. And I sat there, silent, the ledger, resting in my bag like a heartbeat, waiting for its moment. When the lawyer finished, he turned to the judge with a solemn nod. We will show through testimony and documentation that Clara Hale has no choice but to seek control of the family assets. It is the only way forward for her mother's safety and for the downed wire of lass of man, preservation of the family legacy. The judge glanced toward me again, perhaps expecting a rebuttal. I kept my eyes steady, my lips pressed closed. Silence was not weakness, it was patience. I had lived long enough to know that truth does not need to shout to be heard. It only needs to wait for the right moment to be revealed. As the gavel struck to adjourn for recess, Clara leaned slightly toward Ethan, believing no one else would notice. Her sorrowful mask slipped for just a second, replaced by the quick gleam of triumph. It was fleeting, but I saw it, and in that gleam, I knew her story would not hold forever, because the ledger in my possession was not just paper, it was a reckoning, and when the time came, it would speak louder than all her carefully crafted lies. The judge returned from recess, but the room felt different. Clara's lawyer lifted his chin, ready to continue. I rose before he could speak. My chair sighed against the floor. Your Honor, I said steady. Before further testimony, I asked the court to review a document. He studied me for a beat, perhaps. Remembering the portrait they had painted, an old woman unraveling. He nodded toward the bafe. Approach. I walked the aisle with my bag under one arm. I withdrew a single page, a clean copy from a longer record, and set it on the bench. It looked harmless, neat. Columns, initials in the margins. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. His eyes moved left to right, then slowed. He read the first line again. His jaw tightened. The hum of lights became the only sound. He turned the page over, found no trick, Return to the front. A finger traced a column, labeled Remit, followed to a bank code, then to a country abbreviation no one. Here wanted to see linked to a family trust. He glanced at me, then at Clara. What is this? An extract of Cresvale Group's internal ledger, I said. Transactions drawn from my identity to accounts outside the United States. Valorade funds appear here, routed as consulting payments. The initials identify approvals. He read again faster, now connecting lines. Under sat Condor. Exec A dates aligned with filings before this court. A memo carried a short phrase, doc, as if I were a tool for every lock. His gaze hardened. He handed the page to the bailiff who brought it to the clerk. She compared routing numbers against a sealed index. Color drained from her face. The judge lifted his head. His voice sounded nothing like earlier. No one moves, he said, each word a hammer. Close the doors. Metal struck metal as latches fell. The gallery shifted into a low panic, the kind that makes people breathe too fast. Clara's hand found Ethan's, and for a heartbeat I saw truth crack across her face, not grief, calculation failing. Uniformed officers entered in a disciplined line. They did not rush. They did not need to. Mrs. Hale, the judge said, do you have the originating record? Yes, Your Honor. Certified copies and chain of custody. I passed the folder to the bailiff. He delivered it to the bench. The judge leafed through pages, stopping at transfers labeled Remit Ac. He did not ask what the abbreviations meant. He already knew enough. He turned to Clara's lawyer. Were you aware your clients used the plaintiff's identity to move charitable funds to offshore entities flagged by federal regulators? The lawyer's mouth opened, then closed. Your Honor, we object to the character. Sit down, the judge said. Ethan leaned forward, whispering into Clara's ear. She nodded too quickly, as if speed could manufacture innocence. Officers split, one pair along the defense table, another toward the doors. Mrs. Hale, the judge said softer now, thank you for the record. The court acknowledges submission of Exhibit A. A captain stepped to the bench and spoke in a voice only he could hear. The judge's hand closed into a fist, then relaxed. He lifted the microphone. By order of this court, and pursuant to probable cause established by the evidence before me, detained Clara Hale and Ethan Hale pending federal review. Clara shot to of her feet. No, she said, heat breaking through her practiced sorrow. This isn't. An officer reached her. Ma'am, hands where we can see them. Ethan stood. 2. Muscle tensing, eyes darting for a hole that did not exist. Another officer intercepted him with calm firmness that brooked no negotiation. The sound of restraints closing was almost delicate, a click more felt than heard. In the gallery, someone gasped. Another whispered a prayer. I stood very still. I was not triumphant. A hollowness opened inside me, a room where love used to live and now only echo remained. Clara turned toward me as they guided her away. For a second, the veneer fell, and I saw the girl who had once wept into my sweater after a cruel day at school. Her lips moved barely. Mom, she breathed, fragile as smoke. What did you do? I didn't answer. The answer lay on the bench in black ink. The judge addressed the room. Let the record reflect that the court is coordinating with federal authorities. Court is in recess. No one leaves until instructed. The officers escorted Clara and Ethan down the aisle. Cameras tried to find their faces and caught a sleeve, the angle of a lowered head. The back. A door opened to a corridor that would end in fluorescent lights and forms. I sat down slowly. My knees trembled only when the adrenaline began to drain. Across the room, the clerk sealed the page into an evidence sleeve. She wrote the exhibit number in a neat hand, then looked up and met my eyes. It was a small look, the kind that says, I see. You. I nodded once. The bailiff called the next instruction. The gallery shifted again. Quieter now, chastened by ink and the finality of locked doors. I reached for my bag and then stopped. The most important thing I owned was no longer in my possession. It was where it belonged. It would tell the truth without me. As the officers tightened the cuffs around Clara's wrists, her head turned sharply toward me. Her eyes, once bright with rehearsed pity, now burned with something raw and unguarded. Hatred, yes, but beneath it, fear. Trembled like a bird caught in a storm. Her lips parted, and for a fleeting second her practiced mask shattered. "Mom," she whispered, though the courtroom noise swallowed most of it. Then louder, shaking. "I didn't do it by myself. They made me. You don't understand. They wouldn't let me say no." Every syllable struck me like a stone. I had waited months for truth to show its face, but standing there shackled and trembling, my daughter looked less like a thief and more like the child who used to run to me after nightmares. A flood of memories surged, her small hand clutching mine when thunder rattled the windows, her voice begging me not to leave on the first day of school, her promise that she would take care of me when I grew old, and yet here we were, with chains on her wrists and sorrow anchoring my chest. I met her gaze and did not look away. For once there were no lawyers, no judges, no Ethan, whispering poison into her ear. It was just us, mother and daughter, tethered by blood and broken by choices. Her face quivered with defiance, but her eyes were wet. "Clara," I said softly, my voice carrying only as far as it needed to. "You always had a choice." She shook her head violently, hair falling from its perfect frame. "No, you don't know them. You don't know what they hold over me. I tried. I swear I tried. But Ethan said we'd lose everything if I didn't sign. He said it was already too late." He said, her voice cracked. "He said if I fought back, they'd come for me the way they came for you." The officers tugged at her arm, but she dug her heels into the polished floor. For one suspended moment, time bent around us. The judge's gavel sat, idle. The gallery hushed, caught between pity and contempt. My breath came, shallow, not from anger, but from the ache of recognition. Clara had not been the architect. She had been a pawn, groomed and cornered, until she convinced herself betrayal was survival. Yet betrayal had still been hers to wield. "I would have stood by you," I said, the words trembling in my throat. "I would have fought for you, even if the world turned against us. All you had to do was tell me." Her shoulders slumped as tears streaked her cheeks, mascara bleeding into black rivers. "I thought you were too weak. I thought I couldn't handle it." And the irony stung. She had mistaken my silence for fragility when silence had been my strength. She had believed the woman who raised her was already broken while I was still here, steady, standing. An officer pulled her toward the door, but she twisted once more, locking her eyes onto mine with a desperation I had not seen in years. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought they'd stop before it destroyed you." I wanted to reach for her, but my hands stayed folded in front of me. What could I offer? Forgiveness could not erase crimes, nor could pity undo the damage. But love, battered and betrayed as it was, still pulsed faintly between us, impossible to kill outright. The courtroom seemed to fade, leaving only her tear-streaked face and my aching heart. She was both my greatest pride and my deepest wound. And as the officers finally guided her away, I felt the weight of every year between her first cry in the delivery room and this, the moment of collapse. I sat down slowly, staring at the empty space she left behind. The silence pressed in, heavier than chains, but within it lived the truth. Love had not vanished, but it had been bent, twisted, weaponized until mother and daughter stood on opposite ends of justice. And yet, even as pain hollowed me out, I knew one thing with unshakable certainty. This bond, though broken, would always be mine to carry. The storm did not end in the courtroom. It only shifted to the streets, the screens, the headlines that refused to sleep. By the time I stepped outside, the cameras were already waiting, their lenses like unblinking eyes that fed the world. Microphones lunged forward, questions layered over one another until they tangled into noise. "Do you regret turning your daughter in? Did you fabricate evidence to punish your family? Was this about revenge or justice? I said nothing. My silence became a wall, and yet they kept pounding against it, hoping for cracks. When I reached my car, the flashes followed. When I reached my doorstep, the whispers of neighbors carried like smoke through thin walls. The next morning, the papers ran the story in bold black letters. Mother destroys own daughter in Taken. Courtroom scandal. Family torn apart by 50-member feud. Some shows painted me as a martyr of justice. Others, as a bitter woman who had sacrificed blood ties for a taste of power. On one channel, a commentator shook his head and muttered, "Family is sacred. Once you hand your child to the authorities, what's left of Bang? Your soul?" On another, a veteran spoke in my defense, her voice steady. "Sometimes love means not protecting those who choose destruction." I brewed my coffee in the quiet of my kitchen and let the noise roll on without me. The steam rose, fragile and fleeting, like the certainty I once carried about who I part was in my family. Now the world had decided it for me, hero or traitor, savior or villain. The truth I knew was more complicated than they would ever allow. By afternoon, the controversy split into sharper edges. Online petitions demanded harsher punishment for Clara and Ethan. Another movement grew in parallel. Outraged that Clara's father-in-law and mother-in-law had been spared prosecution because of advanced age and health concerns. People wanted their names on indictments, their signatures dragged into court the way mine had been dragged through every lie. Hashtags trended, "Justice for all, no, age excuse." My phone buzzed endlessly with strangers' opinions, with messages from people I had never met insisting they knew my heart. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street. Friends who had once called every week grew quiet. Some could not bear the scandal. Others feared association. A few wrote letters of support telling me I had done what they never found the courage to do, hold family accountable. But even their kindness came laced with sorrow, as if they too believed I had lost something no verdict could restore. I did not answer any of them. Not the reporters, not the critics, not the defenders. Silence had carried me this far, and it would carry me through the aftermath. Words would only feed the fire. I chose instead to let the world argue itself. Horsero. At night, the television flickered in my living room. Clara's face appeared again. And again her tear-streaked cheeks, her voice trembling as she claimed she had only wanted to protect me. Clips of Ethan surfaced, his jaw clenched in defiance. Lawyers vowing to appeal. The pundits debated, spinning webs of speculation until even I, the woman at the center, felt like a stranger in the story. I turned the volume down until the voices faded into a low hum, and I sat in the stillness. The city outside carried on. Sirens in the distance, laughter spilling from a bar down the street, a dog barking in someone's yard. Life moved forward, indifferent to my scandal. Sometimes I wondered if silence was cowardice, if speaking once, just once, might reclaim something the world had stolen. But every time I felt the urge rise, I remembered the look in Clara's eyes when the cuffs closed around her wrists, the mix of hatred and regret, the confession that she had not acted alone. Nothing I said could rewrite that moment. Nothing could change the fracture that cut between us. So I sat with the silence. I brewed tea in the evening and watched steam curl like smoke from a battlefield. I folded laundry with deliberate care, as though smoothing the fabric could also smooth the jagged edges inside me. I opened the curtains each morning and let light fall into the rooms she once filled with her laughter. The world demanded answers, but I gave them none. Let them argue. Let them judge. My voice was no longer for the crowd. My voice belonged to me, and for now, silence was the truest thing I had left. After the noise of the trial had burned itself down into weary silence, I found myself standing in the middle of my kitchen one morning with a letter in my hand. It had come from a stranger, a veteran's wife, thanking me for exposing the fraud that had bled their savings dry. Her words were shaky, written on lined paper in blue ink, but they carried more weight than any verdict. She wrote that she had almost lost everything to the same schemes Clara and Ethan had pushed, that the money stolen had been meant for her husband's treatment after service. If you hadn't spoken up, she ended, we would have been finished. I sat there at the table for a long time, the light spilling across the wood, and I knew I couldn't let my story end with silence. So, I began the Hail Foundation. It started quietly, the way all true things do. No press, no cameras, no grand speeches, just a room, a desk, and a list of names I had gathered from my months of sifting through fraudulent documents. Men and women like me, like my late husband, who had given years to the country only to be discarded or deceived when they came home. I wanted them to know someone was still watching out for them. Someone was still willing to stand up, even if it was just an old woman with tired hands and a scarred heart. I called Naomi first. She agreed, without hesitation, to help with the legal framework. Samuel put his badge away years ago, but his instincts were still sharp. He offered to track down any sign of fraud that crossed our desk. David, with his spreadsheets and sharp mind, volunteered to guard the numbers like they were his own blood. The four of us met around my dining table, drinking lukewarm coffee and sketching out plans on yellow pads. What began as an idea slowly grew into structure. The Hail Foundation's mission was simple: to protect veterans and their families from financial predators. We started with ever-ready hotlines and free consultations. We partnered with banks to flag suspicious transfers. We built a network of volunteers who could sit with widows and explain in plain English what the papers in front of them meant. And slowly, a current began to run through the silence of my life. Hope faint at first, then, and steadier. One evening, a young couple arrived at our door, holding hands too tightly. The husband walked with a limp, a cane tapping against the floor with every step. His wife carried a folder stuffed with letters and contracts. When she sat across from me, she whispered, "We think we've been trapped in something, but we don't know how to. Fight it." I opened the folder and saw it instantly. The same language, the same forged approvals, the same polished lies that had once carried Clara's name. The signatures cut into me like knives, but I kept my face still. This couple had been targeted by the very network I had helped bring down. They had been asked to sign away their small home in exchange for loans that never came, relief funds that evaporated the moment they hit their account. I looked into their eyes and saw the fear I had once felt in my own bones, the dread of being erased by people you thought you could trust. "You're not alone," I told them. "We'll take care of this together." Naomi had the filings drafted within a week, each paragraph sharp with precision. Samuel unraveled the paper trail like a surgeon peeling back layers of deceit, every forged signature and doctored document tethered neatly to Cresvale's shadow. David compiled the evidence with relentless care, every dollar traced, every mark authenticated. And when the ruling came down, the gavel did not simply strike, it thundered. The judge restored the home to the couple, froze the accounts of those who had preyed on them, and for the first time in months, justice stood tall in that courtroom. Later, the wife sent me a letter. Her handwriting trembled across the page. "We thought we were finished. You gave us back our lives." I folded it carefully, reverently, and placed it beside another letter, the one that had started this journey. Together, they became my most precious possessions, worth more than wealth, more than any victory. The foundation began humbly, with files spread across my dining table, but step by step it grew. Soon we moved into a modest downtown office. Volunteers filled the space with voices, with the smell of strong coffee, with laughter that carried like balm into every corner. The bare walls slowly blossomed into something alive: charts tacked with progress, photographs of families we had helped, notes of gratitude penned in uneven hands. And in the evenings, when the building quieted and I stood at the window watching the city lights shimmer, I allowed myself the rarest indulgence: a smile. I knew I could never mend what had broken between Clara and me. The wound of her betrayal still lived inside me, sharp, unyielding. Yet through the foundation, I found a way to reshape the ache, to turn bitterness into balance, grief into purpose. It was never about revenge anymore. It was about protection, about ensuring that others would never be destroyed by the very hands that should have offered care. In helping them, I stitched something in myself I hadn't realized was still bleeding. And so the Hail Foundation became my new family, a family not bound by blood, but by scars, by the stubborn refusal to be broken. The morning another letter arrived was quiet, almost fragile. I rose early, brewed tea, and let sunlight spill through the blinds in golden stripes across my kitchen table. The mail was an ordinary pile of bills and flyers, except for one plain envelope, no return address, the kind you might overlook. I slid it open with a trembling hand. "Dear Mrs. Hale," it began, written in careful slanted script. "You don't know us, but because of you, our family is still whole." My eyes caught on that line, and something shifted deep in my chest. The letter unfolded a story. A retired sergeant and his wife, a school secretary, nearly stripped of everything by the same fraudulent web Clara and Ethan had helped weave. Their savings drained, their home teetering on foreclosure, until the foundation stepped in. "We thought we didn't matter," they wrote, "that no one would ever fight for people like us. But you did. You stood when we couldn't, and now we know we are not invisible." I traced the words with my fingertips, as if they might disappear. My hands trembled in a way they hadn't since the trial. Tears blurred the ink, uninvited but unstoppable. I had stared down betrayal without flinching, but gratitude undone me completely. For so long, I had carried the weight of being unwanted by my own child, of being cast aside as though decades of sacrifice had meant nothing. And yet, here was proof ink on paper that the love I had poured into the world was not wasted. It had reached someone. It had saved them. It had mattered. These tears were not bitter, not the hollow sobs of sleepless nights after Clara's betrayal. They were softer, cleansing, healing tears. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling its strange weight, lighter and heavier all at once. That day, I carried it everywhere. I read it again at the window, watching children weave bicycles down cracked sidewalks. I read it again before bed, lamplight spilling warmth across the page. And every time, one line stopped me cold. "We thought we didn't matter." Those words carved deep, because they mirrored my own truth, cast aside, unwanted, invisible. Yet here, strangers had returned to me something my daughter never could: certainty that my life still touched others, that I was not erased. I folded the letter and placed it beside my medals, my husband's wedding band, Clara's childhood drawings. It belonged among the fragments of my life that held the deepest truths. That night in the dark, I whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, to the universe perhaps, to time, to survival, to the unseen thread that had carried that letter into my hands. Blood had failed me, but strangers had become kin. And that was the quiet revelation. Salvation does not always come from those you expect. Sometimes it comes from those you have never met, who carry your name on their lips with gratitude instead of shame. I slept with the letter beneath my pillow. Dawn came, tender and merciful. I walked the shoreline in a cardigan and old sneakers, the sand still cool where the tide had just withdrawn. Gulls skimmed low, brushing the water like white strokes across a canvas. I breathed in rhythm with the sea, each step sinking to the hush before the world woke. Out here there were no cameras, no judges, no headlines, only water, wind, and a ribbon of land holding me steady. I thought of the courtroom doors locking, the metallic clang like a verdict written in steel. I thought of Clara's voice, brittle and brave, calling me a burden. I thought of the page I placed on the bench, as if laying a stone upon a grave. I had not felt triumph that day, only the hollow ache of something ending. Even now, with the ocean's breath cool on my skin, the ache remained a familiar companion, no longer steering but still present. And yet, after the noise, small things had returned. The whistle of the kettle, the citrus burst of a peeled orange, ordinary moments, fragile but enduring. I paused, slipping a hand into my pocket to touch the folded letter. Its creases had softened, but the words were carved into me. "We thought we didn't matter." I whispered them aloud into the wind, letting the gulls carry them farther than I ever could. Worth and usefulness, I realized, are not the same thing. Love is not a ledger balanced by return. A piece of driftwood lay at my feet, smooth from years in salt water. I lifted it, turning it in my hands. The ocean had worn away the sharp edges. What remained was not ruined, but truer to its grain. I understood. I too had been shaped, not destroyed. The sun climbed higher, scattering diamonds across the waves. A runner passed, nodding without words. Farther down, a man threw a stick, his dog bounding after it with joyous abandon. Life moved forward, steady, unrelenting. For years, I thought courage meant speeches and gavel strikes, doors thrown open and names shouted into unwilling rooms. Now I knew different. Courage sometimes sounded like the kettle in an empty kitchen, the scratch of a pen across a donor form, the steady voice answering a call. "Hello, this is Ulysa. Tell me what happened. We'll begin again." Beginning, I learned, is its own kind of victory. I forgive Clara in increments. The frightened child, I forgive. The woman who chose harm, I do not. Both truths live inside me without war. If she ever seeks another way, I will meet her where consequence and love intersect. Until then, I let the ocean keep what I cannot carry for her. A pelican dropped into the waves, rose with silver flashing in its beak. The sea kept providing, even for those unready to receive. I whispered another thank you. To the water, to time, to the woman I had become silent once, but no longer silenced. Some battles are fought in silence, and sometimes that silence is the loudest victory. The tide answered, steady and eternal. I turned back toward the shore, my footprints already fading, and walked on.